Hello and welcome. I'm Ari Lax, and this week we have the update of one of my favorite modern decks, and that is Restore Balance. So, with As Foretold being released in Amonkhet, uh, Restore Balance gets to be a little different. So, this is based off of a list I had in an article, I want to say 2 weeks ago now. Um, and specifically, that was based off of a list that a team finished 12th at Grand Prix San Antonio, one of their players playing it. And that was a four-color list, and that's where the mana specifically is borrowed from that. But As Foretold changes it up a little. So to kind of walk through what the deck is attempting to do, um, Restore Balance is balance for those who've played with that card. For those who haven't, what ends up happening is everyone sacrifices down to the least number of lands and creatures anyone has and discards down to the least number of cards in hand anyone has. So in this deck, you're basically creatureless. So it's a Wrath. You're playing artifacts. Specifically, one of the things with Restore Balance is that it doesn't count enchantments and artifacts in the sacrifice. So one of the ways to break the symmetry on card count there is to expend cards going towards artifacts and enchantments that give you a consistent advantage, and then use Restore Balance to knock out your opponent's resources and then ride those artifacts or enchantments to victory. So we've got Border Posts for mana instead of lands, so that when we fire off Restore Balance, we can make our opponent sacrifice lands after we've bounced lands to Border Post. As Foretold is another pseudo mana source here, because you can pay 0 instead of paying for the non-existent cost on Restore Balance, which 0 is a pretty good deal for that. Convert a mana cost of 0. Convert a mana cost of 0 lines up with 0 time counters. Very nice. So As Foretold's another enchantment that lets you sink a card into some effective thing. The important part of As Foretold as well, on top of that, is that you are creating a card that sometimes with the old lists, you would get bogged down with like 2 border posts and a land, but not like the right land to cast your Nahiri, and then you take a couple turns off and your opponent might have sandbagged some lands or whatever. It's like, no, As Foretold is going to be taking up every single turn. It is going to be not only the thing that casts your Restore Balance, but then the thing that casts your Nahiri or all of your other spells. So that's pretty freaking sweet. Very happy with that upgrade to the deck. So we got some border posts. I did some gold fishing. I've increased the number of Field Mist border posts by 1 from the initial list because of the interaction. There's this problem where the deck doesn't need that much red mana, or as much as it looks like, especially because Blood Moon is going to fix you for red, and then once you have a Blood Moon in play, you're going to need blue, white, green. Actually, I think I'm actually gonna. This is what I was gold fishing with: was 3 Field Mists, 2 Fire Wilds. This does make suspending an early Greater Gargadon, so you can sack all your lands. It makes it a little harder, but I'm okay with that downgrade. I'm fine with fetching some basic mountains. We have Detention Sphere, an enchantment that destroys a creature. Or really anything, specifically because Restore Balance doesn't count enchantments, artifacts, planeswalkers. Opposing copies of cards of those types are problematic, so Detention Sphere is good. I had Bant Charm in here, but the mana is a little for Bant Charm, so not quite what I was looking for. It's a factor of having basics in your deck and then like border posts, and it's not like the pure, you'll fetch your first 3 lands, so you'll just have the mana to do whatever you want. It's not quite that reliable. Simian Spirit Guide, just great. You're one of the decks trying to accelerate out nonsense early. And then you have your Cascade Spells, which are the traditional way to hit your converted mana cost 0 cards. So you've got Violent Outburst and Ardent Plea in this deck. So because you're branching out to As Foretold, you can upgrade Demonic Dread, which requires a creature to target, to Ardent Plea, which doesn't. You're making your mana worse to begin with, so may as well go all the way. And then in terms of finishers, obviously Gargadon is going to be in basically every Restore Balance deck. Nahiri's kind of become the go-to. It handles enchantments and artifacts. Also, you have a lot of nonsense to cycle. Also, it kills really fast. It's pretty reasonable to just like turn 2 Nahiri plus it, and a lot of the time it might just be enough to kill your opponent with Emrakul that way. And then we have Kiora the Crashing Wave, which is a card I have not tried, but in theory the preventing damage to and by a permanent is pretty good against the way Modern has shaped up. The draw card ability I'm kind of on, because drawing cards when you're trying to reduce your opponent's resources with balance is not the greatest, but it does tick up reasonably fast to a very lethal ultimate. So I would like to try it. I think the card I would like to play, if I could play any Planeswalker, is Ashiok. But unfortunately, you can't really make that work with the mana in any way, shape, or form that's reasonable. I guess you could do. I guess it might be time to try like green, red, black, blue, but then you lose Nahiri. I've laid out these lists. They're weird. One final note. So as you'll see, there's two basic islands. That's because island, it's just your best basic for what you're trying to do, even though it doesn't cast your threats. Um, Combining with Firewild Border Post lets you still cast Azrael. Combining with either of your other border posts lets you cast your Ardent Plea. You want 4 of your core, like the way your border posts line up, you're gonna have 4 colors, and you want the one that makes your middle 2, like your green white. In the old deck, it was your white red green black deck. You wanted your green red one. You want the middle one the most usually, but in this case, so that combos with your maximized Firewild or Wild Field Border Post. These names are absurd. To cast Ardent Plea, and then from there, there's a Whimsicott Teeth, which looks a little weird because there's no basic forest. But if you kind of lay everything out, these are the basics you want, or the fetch duels you want. So you want to be able to fetch the dual lands that don't line up with your. You don't want Hallowed Fountain, and you don't want Stomping Ground, because like you want the ones that line up across. Like you can draw like Mountain, Stomping Ground, Ardent Plea, and that just sucks. So you want the ones that go across your 2 Cascade Spells, and that means you're going to be wanting to play these. You don't want Temple Garden because it doesn't really cast any of your cards. It also lines up with Wild Field Border Post. But you basically want all your lands to make blue or red, because that casts your core spells of like Gargadon and stuff. But you don't want them to line up with these. It's a little tricky. But anyways, back to the end of that. It ends up that if you put any other of the on-color fetches in your deck, you end up in a weird spot where like you can't fetch the lands you want, and so Heath Breeding Pool just lines up to let Heath get Sacred Foundry or Breeding Pool, which gives you all of your colors. It's not really a good way to do that otherwise without doing all sorts of stuff. You need a specific number of basics and fetches in your deck to support border posts. So like once you start fiddling with a lot of the stuff to give yourself, oh, I can add another duel to the deck, it's like, well, you really can't. Like this is what you have to have. So yeah, it's a little wonky, but kind of how life has to go. But I'm excited to try this deck. The sideboard, as foretold, cuts a little bit of the interaction from the deck. So as a result, you'll see the sideboard being a little more linear. So we've got just a bunch of ley lines to hate out, Dredge on this one, and then Leyline of Sanctity is good against both black-green decks and burn and things like that. We've got some artifact and enchantment removal. This is courtesy of the delightful new split card rules. So this now has a converted mana cost of 3, so you can't cascade into it. And you have an Ingot Chewer just to be a little more efficient against like Affinity or KCI combo. And then you have Causal X Return as your sweeper of choice, your bonus sweeper. Can't really cast Anger of the Gods on this mana, unfortunately. And then I'm trying a mix of Odds Ends and Ricochet Trap against counters. I like Odds Ends because it can actually counter opposing combo cards in a pinch. 50-50 is better than 0. But Ricochet Trap being more efficient might just be better. So I'm excited to see how this goes, and I'm excited to leave my opponents with absolutely 0 cards.